All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you're with us tonight. Uh, Thank you for joining me tonight for Let's Talk Recovery. Glad everybody's here. Um, I am going to ask, as you jump in tonight, if you don't mind, if you can let us know in the comments where you're checking in from. I would appreciate that. I like to know where viewers are coming in from. Um, as we're together tonight, if you end up having any comments, if you have any questions about anything this evening, the comments here on Facebook are live, or if you end up watching this later after it's been posted, you can make comments or ask questions there, and I respond to those later when I see them. Tonight, I have a special guest with me. And I got to tell you, I usually get a lot more viewers when I have a guest. That tells me what you all think about me personally. Um, but my guest tonight is a friend of mine, Betsy Wright. In fact, I was just at Betsy and her husband's house last night, and a group of us were together there. Her husband made his famous ribs, and we had a pitch in, and it was a really good time. But Betsy is here tonight, and Betsy is a friend of mine. Betsy works for Prison Fellowship, and and Betsy knows a little bit about trauma. And that's why I have her here tonight. I'm interested. I learn a lot when I'm able to have guests. And I'm excited to have her here tonight. And so, Betsy, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, tell us what you do and why you know so much about trauma?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Ron. I'm a huge fan of yours. I hope you know that. And so when you asked me to be on the podcast, even though it is really my bedtime now, I said, absolutely, I will do that. And love having conversations with you over this topic. Um, I have been working with Prison Fellowship for about 8.5 years now, and I get to work on the side of Angel Tree, which is working with the children of the incarcerated and the families. And so we know that in that space, there is a lot of trauma for these kids who have a parent that is absent from them due to incarceration. And it can be ongoing trauma because of the things that happen when a parent leaves and you've lost income, you've lost support, you have lost community support because of the situation. And so the family can face a lot of trauma. And so I got into trauma work about 5 years ago as we were just trying to figure out in our world when we connect with partners who serve these kids, specifically with summer camp. We wanted to equip them to understand the kids that we're sending their way and to help them navigate this journey with these kids. And so we got into some trauma training through Texas Christian University and the Karen Parvis Institute of Childhood Development, and it's called Trust-Based Relational Intervention. And I became a practitioner through that, and I have another member on my team who also became a practitioner, and we trained camps on understanding the kids that we're sending to them and how to um, just navigate life with them and how to understand the behaviors and the hurts and the insecurities and all the things. But in going through this training, even though it was geared towards kids, I realized, wow, this is really applicable to anybody. And understanding the trauma in my own story, which I think we're probably going to talk about this, but I did not realize that I had undergone any trauma, but in an interview that we had to do as part of this training, um, I realized some things, and then my husband has been through a lot of trauma in his childhood, and so taking these things that I learned for children to support children and the children that we serve really has expanded and it's just applicable across the board. And I've seen in my journey with my husband a lot of growth and a lot of healing in his journey, just understanding some of these concepts and learning how we can rewire our brain because God is so amazing in that He gave us brains that are plastic, that even though we have this trauma and these deep-rooted things, there's healing found in that, and our brains can heal from that. And so it's just exciting to do. So it's one of my favorite topics. And so I know you and I like to talk about things and what we're learning. So happy to be here tonight.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here. And, you know, I work in the area of addiction, all kinds of addiction, drugs, alcohol, unhealthy sexual behavior, all kinds of things there. I can remember when I was young, maybe all the way back to grade school, but I know back into junior high, and people would talk about addiction and they would talk about our brains. And the general consensus seemed to be that when our brains uh, are affected by things like drugs or alcohol or unhealthy behaviors, that anything that happens to our brains is permanent. I remember specifically hearing the damage is permanent. You never get over it. And that was used kind of as a scare tactic to try to keep us from experimenting with drugs and alcohol. And but over the years, the research and the studies that talk about our brains being plastic, that idea of neuroplasticity, and that our brains really can change, and that in fact they want to change, and that we are able to heal. So here's where I want to start with you. And let me throw out while I'm thinking about it, because I lose track sometimes in my thought process. But for those of you that are here with us tonight live, as we're talking, if you end up having any comments or any questions, you can feel free to put those into the chat. And we will be happy. I'm going to put Betsy on the spot and make her answer any questions that you have. And but you're welcome to ask questions. You're welcome to make comments. I will let you know though that the feed on Facebook is about 8 to 10 seconds delayed from Betsy and I talking here. So if you ask a question, could be a slight delay before I see it and we respond to it. But you're welcome to ask questions and make comments. So here's where I want to start, Betsy. For people, and this would be me too, for the vast majority of my life, for people who hear the word trauma, a lot of times we think that that only applies to extreme events. When we hear the word trauma, we think about people being beaten or people being sexually abused as children. And I talk to people all the time in the work that I do, and I will bring up trauma. And almost everybody's initial response is, well, I've never experienced trauma. That really doesn't apply to me. And so I'm interested in knowing, would you have a definition of trauma that you could present to us?
Yeah, so, I know a lot of times when people think about trauma, they think about it's when a really bad thing happens to you. Like you're um like you said, beaten up, you're abused, you're in a horrible accident. Um, but when you look at it, you can look at two different people who have the same bad experience and it affects them differently. So it's not necessarily it's a bad thing, but it's not necessarily trauma for both people. And I think when you look at trauma, there are two factors that make it traumatic for an individual. And in the same situation, those factors may not be there for two different people, but one of them is agency. And that's whether I have any control over the situation. Do I have any power in this situation, in this moment? And the second is, do I have a voice? Do I have a voice to be able to say anything about what is happening? And when those things are absent, that affects us deeply. That trauma gets rooted deeply. And that can be a multitude of things. It can even, we were talking earlier, it can even be in our childhood, in our attachment with our caregivers. We can have trauma there based on that attachment and or lack of attachment. And because as children, especially, we don't have a voice and we don't have any control over what's going on. And so those things are happening and they're affecting us deeply. And we carry those traumas. Unless we process through that with somebody, we carry those traumas and they affect us into adulthood, even though we think, oh, that happened in the past. Well, no. When you have trauma, and I might be getting ahead of myself or ahead of you, but when we have trauma, we have neurons in our brain that fire. You have the event, you have the response, and those neurons in your brain fire together. And we have a saying that says, neurons that fire together wire together. So next time something like that happens, that same response is going to come quickly. And so then we see those quick anger moments. We see those triggers that just send somebody off. The event didn't happen again, but there was something that reminded us about that event, and those neurons started firing in our brain. So it continues to affect us, even though it might have been one-time experience.
Okay. And so if you see me look away while you're talking, I'm making notes because I'm coming up with questions while you're talking. I had questions coming into this, but I always learn so much when I meet with other people. Um, and so would you say that trauma is more, is it more about the specific event that we experience, or is it and you spoke to this with that idea of agency and that kind of thing, but so trauma then would be, I don't know, would it be less than the event and more about how we experience it and how we perceive it, or is that kind of a thing where both of those are kind of on equal ground? What do you think on that?
I don't know that I think they're just intertwined in there. Um, because you can have two different people who come from different experiences, different mindsets, um, different histories. So everything in our history, all of our experiences, um, are create this lens with which we view the world, which we view the things around us.
Hmm.
So people can have two different lenses on and experience the same thing. It's like we talk about, is the glass full, is the glass half empty? So you have two different lenses. It's the same glass. It's the same thing, same amount of water in that glass. But because of my experience that I bring to this situation, I see it differently. So I think I think what you're bringing in to the situation, it I won't say it makes it more or less traumatic, but I think the trauma we can deal with it differently.
Hmm.
So we can come out of that trauma and find a healthy way out of that trauma or not. Um,
Hmm. So can people, a lot of times, I think I mentioned this, a lot of times when I meet with people, I'll bring up the idea of trauma, and almost always the initial response that I get is, yeah, I don't think I experienced any trauma when I was young. So, so it's possible for people to experience trauma and not realize that that's what's happening, that that's what's going on.
Yeah, you can think of, well, that was just our family. That's normal for us. Not having perspective of how other families interact with each other. Like you think coming from a family who's yelling, who's abusive towards each other, that's normal. That's your normal. And so you don't necessarily think, oh, that was traumatic. That was the house that I grew up in. And so no, that was just the way we interacted. Like you hear people say that, well, that's just the way we are. No, that's not normal, but you don't have that perspective of something different. And so you don't really see it as trauma, but it's affecting you. It is traumatic.
Hmm. I know for me, I grew up in a home with an alcoholic father, and I was maybe in second or third grade before I really began to realize everybody else in class with me doesn't have the same kind of things going on when they go home. Um, it's just what I had known my entire life,
Mhm.
even though my life was short at that point. But it's what I'd always experienced, and I just assumed it was normal. And so that's kind of the way that a lot of people relate to trauma.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, my trauma is a little bit different. We were talking through attachments and how did I attach with my parents and how did they attach with me? And um, like I'm going through this interview in my process of becoming a practitioner, and she would always say, "Tell me about a time or something specific," and I'm like, I was getting frustrated with myself because I couldn't remember specifics. I remembered generalities and I remembered feelings. And I said to her, I said, I don't know why I can't remember something specific.
Hmm.
But when we got through the whole thing and we're talking, at the end, she's like, well, you couldn't remember because you experienced trauma. And I'm like, no, I didn't. Like, I grew up in a Christian home. We went to church all the time, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, like all the things. I went to a Christian school. I didn't experience trauma. But um, in the home, in our attachment, there wasn't that loving, nurturing space to grow up in. It was very authoritative. It was very much, this is how it is. You don't have a voice. The answer was always no if I wanted to do something. I didn't have any agency or control. But to me, that was normal. And I would never have said that I had experienced trauma. But I saw how that affected my relationships and how I related with my husband, with my kids, with other people, um, because of that in my home that I experienced. So
Hmm.
it can be things that we think are normal and we don't think of as trauma, but it is.
Hmm. For me, one of the things that I have experienced, especially when I was in active addiction, but to be honest, I still experience it occasionally, is that I would have something happen and I would go off. My reaction would just be over the top. And there were times when it almost felt like I didn't even have control of how I was reacting. And I didn't have any idea why I was having the outburst that I was. But sometimes I was aware what just happened. I'm not responding to what just happened. There's something else going on. Is that, would that be an example of how trauma works and comes out in us?
Yeah, so go back. I'm a nerd about brain science because I think it's so fascinating the way God made our brains. But um, when we talk about trauma, there's a model, a hand model that helps us understand. And so, like this part of your hand, your wrist, and everything's your brain stem. So that's all your life function, your breathing, your digestion, all of those things. The thumb in here is your amygdala, and I always like to describe it as the cloud. Because everything is stored here. So all of our experiences, all of our emotions, um, how we process things are stored here. And you can call it survival brain, animal brain. Like this is what triggers for fight, flight, or freeze. So we all learned about fight, flight, or freeze in school when something happens, and God made us that way so we can survive. If there's a fire, we get up and run. We don't sit there and process and think, "Oh, there's a fire. So what steps do I need to take to be safe?" And we just get up and everything's out the door. We're running. But when that happens, when we have something, it triggers that amygdala. So the fingers over here are upper cortex, our prefrontal lobe. This is our executive function. So this is where we process things. This is where we verbalize, verbal processing, um, moral decisions, all kinds of things, executive functions of our brains is at this point. But when we're triggered, that's offline. So, um, you can't tell somebody to calm down when they're upset. It's
Mhm.
never worked once to say that to somebody because verbal processing, they're not processing what you're saying. They're not even processing what they're saying. Like it just comes out. It's just automatic. And I heard somebody um, say they were um, blind angry, like didn't even remember what they said. Blackout angry. That's what they said. Blackout angry. And you just go off and you're like, I don't know what just happened. But one, you may not know what you're saying. You may not remember the whole situation afterwards. And you're not processing. And it wasn't necessarily because of that situation, but there was something in that situation that triggered your brain back to a past experience, back to a memory, back to an emotion. Um, like feeling like you're not seen or not heard, feeling like nobody's listening to you. And all of a sudden that was my husband's triggers. Like if he felt like I wasn't listening to him, that was like giving value to him as a person and his opinions. I was listening, I heard everything, but because he didn't feel that, like he would trigger and rage would happen. And so those things happen because we have these triggers. Everything is stored in our amygdala. It's all in there in our limbic system. And so something hits and you just respond. You're not processing, you're not thinking about how you're going to respond. You just do. And so when you can understand that that's what's going on in our brain, um, that, it wasn't what somebody said just in that moment. It was that made something inside of you. You felt a certain way because of what they said, and that triggered past experience and those neurons to fire. But when we can be aware that this is happening, then that's the beginning of the journey towards healing because then we can identify it next time it happens and say, oh, wait, my lid's flipped and I need to step back for a minute and come back. And it's a process to go through that, but you can raise your own awareness about that and about those moments and understand, oh, wait, it wasn't. whatever she said to me, it was, oh, I had that same feeling that caused a
Hmm.
certain feeling in me, and it wasn't that person, it wasn't that situation.
Yeah. Your husband is watching now, and he's been throwing comments into the chat. And so he's already put in there about flipping our lid, and
Yep.
those are all things that I've been hearing from him for a few years now. And yeah, and it's pretty clear where he learned those things.
Well, it's been healing for him to understand, wow, okay, that makes sense, and I can identify it when it
Hmm.
happens. And when we started the journey, like it might be a day before he was like, oh, yeah, and then that distance between when that happened and when he realized it kept shortening and shortening and shortening. And
Hmm.
so now, like we're all in a healing journey. We all get triggered, but now he's like, oh wait, hold on, let me step back. And he can identify it in the moment, and work towards having a conversation about this made me feel.
Hmm.
I don't think that you were saying this, but this made me feel. And so we can talk through things. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. I had you were talking earlier about lenses, and you brought up attachment, and all those things are connected. Um, uh, yeah, those are some discussions I'm going to have again. I might have to have you back again to talk about some things if this goes well tonight, and you're comfortable with coming back. But um, so with trauma, a lot of times trauma stems from childhood experiences. It doesn't have to be a childhood experience, I'm assuming. It can be
Right.
something we experienced as an adult.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I talked recently with somebody with a gentleman that um, had experienced trauma as a child. He'd experienced some abuse, actually entered into the military because of the abuse he experienced as a child. I don't know how common that is, but I've talked to a number of men that entered the military specifically because of something they experienced as children. But he was in the military, and and then after he had come out of the military, he felt that physically and mentally he was in a place where nobody would ever be able to abuse him again. And not too long after he came out of the military, he was working evenings in a like a 7-Eleven kind of a place, stocking the cooler, and came out to find that the cashier was being robbed, and he got shot twice.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, he was hit with that idea of, I still don't have control over anything. And that amplified all these things he'd experienced as a child. And um, so as we begin to recognize that we have experienced trauma in our life, some people talk about big T trauma and little T trauma. Um, I don't know that I like that idea, uh, but as we begin to realize that we've experienced trauma, and you mentioned a lot of us think that it was just the way we grew up. It was normal. Um, as we begin to realize that, what happens, there's this idea that book that's out now, The Body Keeps the Score.
Mhm.
And I know even as I get activated occasionally still, I feel things happen in my body. how's that connected to the trauma that we're experiencing in the present and the trauma we've experienced in the past? Is that connected?
Sure. So when trauma happens, our there's a whole body response. It's not just in our brains. And when we are in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, when our lid is flipped, our body releases cortisol in that moment. And that is what gets us moving to what we need to do. But cortisol is a stress hormone. And so if we experience continued trauma, we continually are flooding our bodies with cortisol and that stress hormone. That affects your body. It's not just in your brain. When you're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, your sympathetic nervous system is activated. And so what is happening is your body is preparing itself to fight, to survive. And so your pupils will dilate, your heart's beating faster, your lungs are getting ready for more breath, and like digestive system shuts down because that's extraneous at that point. Like we don't need to be digesting food. Your body is preparing itself to fight. So when continued trauma happens, our bodies can stay in that mode and we stay in that hyper vigilant, hyper alert mode. So our muscles are tense. Our heart is always rapidly beating. We're always alert and looking. And, it's not good for your body to be in that mode. It's not good for our bodies to have all of that cortisol. I mean, it affects your weight, it affects so many different things, your sleep, different things like that. And so it is very much a physical response as much as it is a mental response and an emotional response. And so our bodies, when that trigger event happens, like the whole body's responding. So I'm starting up all over again. And if you pay attention, like you're gonna be like, oh yeah, my heart's beating faster in that moment, or I'm like my shoulders are super tense right now, and
Hmm.
I'm just, stressed, feeling all over. And so it
Hmm.
does affect us and we have to treat the whole. You can't just treat a part of it. You have to treat the whole um,
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
find healing.
I had an uncle when I was young that always carried the giant bottles of Rolaids because he was always stressed and
Hmm.
his stomach. But there's a friend of mine that he was interesting to watch because you could tell when he started to get triggered or activated. As it was starting, his leg would start to bounce a little bit.
Hmm.
And as he would get more and more activated, his leg would bounce more until he'd be shaking the table or something like, and he wouldn't even realize. But here's what was interesting about him is that you knew when you really needed to go to work to get him calm because he would move from his leg bouncing, he'd start to rock. His leg would bounce and he'd start to rock. That was an indicator he was getting a little more. And then his leg would be going and he'd be rocking. And all of a sudden, when you saw his arm or his shoulder start to twitch, you knew you had to get him calmed down really quick
Yeah.
because he was about to blow a gasket. And I'll share my little thing. My ex-wife, I'm divorced. My ex-wife used to get furious with me, and I've actually shared this with the guys in the Monday group that I attend. Your husband is a part of that group with me, and I've shared with the guys in that group. One of my things when I'm getting activated is I lock my fingers and I take my fingernails and my thumbs and I start to click them. And I don't even realize I'm doing that. But my ex-wife used to lose her mind because she could hear that. And it just drove her up the wall. And so now it's funny because in the Monday night group, occasionally I'll start doing that, and somebody will call me out. What's happening, Ron? What's got you activated here, buddy?
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
we have a
we
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say we have our own, like we have our cues that
Hmm.
if you pay attention, you can see when somebody is getting into that mode of a flipped lid. And you
Hmm.
can see it if you know the person, if you pay attention, you can see those warning signs coming and you can step in
Hmm.
if you're equipped to help kind of pull them back.
Yeah. For me, a big step, something that's been extremely beneficial, is beginning to recognize things like my clicking my fingernails like that. Um, I now catch myself. For years, people would get after me for doing that. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. But now I catch myself doing it. And when I do, I recognize what's happening. And we got a question in the comments here. Um, and Rob is asking, what's the experience like for a wife and kids living with a husband or a dad that's healing from trauma?
Mm. Well, I think I can speak from my experience, and I'll just do that rather than making blanket statements. But um, when a spouse is going through trauma and maybe hasn't processed that trauma and really addressed that trauma and kind of worked through that trauma, because that it's very much a journey. It's not like, oh, I should be better. It shouldn't affect me anymore. Um, like the family goes through the trauma with the person. So um, the the wife usually takes the brunt of it. I know in our story, um, I would take the brunt of the blow-ups, and the kids would get some of it too, and they would feel that. But as the mom, as the wife, I would try to often step in between and try to, keep the lions at bay, and kind of calm the situation as much as possible, but often internalizing all of that. So when the dad, the husband is on a healing journey, um, he's gotta understand it's a journey for the whole family because they have all of their own experiences and their own traumas to deal with that are secondary to his. And so there needs to be space and grace in the whole family to be able to work through those things and to be able to talk about those things. And I think, especially for our kids, we've got to create space to allow them to talk about their feelings and letting it be a safe space for them to do that. Because naturally, we want to defend ourselves. And we need to give them the space to process. Like husbands need to give their wives space to kind of process their feelings and say, this made me feel whatever. But in the same time, the wife, on the other hand, needs to be that sounding board and allow her husband to process through his trauma and his continued journey. So, there's a lot of hurts in the family and there's a lot of things to process, but um, we have to be able to create a safe space for each other and extend grace. And my husband and I, Sean, we are certainly not perfect, but we know how to forgive and to say, okay, I understand you didn't mean that. The way that came out, you didn't mean it. I know there's other things happening and I just got the brunt of it. And so allowing for mistakes in the healing journey is super important all the way around. And just creating that safe space to talk and accept and acknowledge the other's feelings is super important.
Um, and I'll just throw in there too. Um, One of the things, and early on, what I'm about to say is not something that I thought about or that I don't even know if I would have been able to do it early in my recovery, but coming to a place for me of recognizing um, how abrasive I can be and how I can take my feelings out on other people and beginning to be able to recognize that and then make a conscious decision when I see what's happening. Man, I need to come back and I need to make some repair here.
Mhm.
I need to own what I'm doing and I need to verbalize I was out of line. That wasn't about you at all. Um, and like I said, there are times, probably still, when it's just not easy for me to step into that and to recognize that. There are other times, though, when I recognize that really quick, and then I have to have that battle. Am
Mhm.
I going to own it?
Right. With our kids, when we're doing training with kids who come from hard places and dressing their behavior episodes, we call them. We don't call them like they're not bad kids. They had an episode. And when there's a rupture, when they do something and it ruptures that relationship, you have to be willing to step in there beside them and repair that and give that a place for repair after that rupture. You address the rupture, but then you always bring it back to um, good standing relationship at the end of that rupture. And so we have to be intentional about that on both sides. Um, Sean has to be intentional about that with me, and I have to be intentional about that with him, is to go from that rupture and make sure we always circle back to repair and we don't leave that fractured part of our relationship just sitting there. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not an easy thing to do. Nobody wants to admit I made a mistake or wow, I was a huge jerk in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants, it's not fun. It's not fun to admit to your poor behavior and to say you were wrong. But if we really love that person and are dedicated to that relationship, it's got to be that continuous cycle.
Yeah.
And then those cycles get a whole lot smaller when we're in that mode of and getting used to doing that.
Uh, I know for me in the home that I grew up in, repair's not anything that ever took place. And I'm sure that there were times when my parents, and primarily my dad, there were times when I could almost tell he felt guilty even about some of the things that he had done. But we were always expected to just keep quiet about it. And and to be honest, that Sean and I have talked about this. From we can see things like that and make a decision. I'm never going to be like that. I'm never going to be like what I saw. But at the same time, for me, it was hard for me not to be like that because that's the only thing that was demonstrated for me.
Yeah.
Um, and as much as that hurt me and I didn't like it, it became the primary way that I knew to handle situations.
Yeah. A lot of times when you don't see an alternative, you know that was bad, but you don't have an example of an alternative. And so it's hard not to repeat that. In my house, it was like my mom would get upset, and then it would just be we'd walking on eggshells and just kind of watching her temperature, engaging. Is she, oh, nope, stay away, go play upstairs, go do something, stay away until we could see, oh, okay. Oh, I saw a smile. Okay, it's okay to come out from hiding. And
Hmm.
so, as much as I didn't like that, when I look back when my kids were young, like I could go into that mode and just be
Hmm.
upset. And instead of coming back to the kids and saying, it's okay, I know, you didn't mean it, or just dealing with behavior and moving on, like that was the example I had. And so that's what I knew to do. And so even though we might know it's bad, it goes back to what we know and what we experience, and we tend to replicate those things.
Hmm. So here's a question for you. Two questions. In processing trauma, do you think it's possible for us to process trauma and to work through it without talking through it with somebody in a safe place? Is that possible?
I'm gonna say no. I mean, we can work through a lot on our own, but we were made for relationship. God did not make us to live in a bubble. He made us for relationship, and there's healing when you have somebody to walk through and process through that journey with you. And I don't know that you can fully process and walk through without having that person to do that together, because we need to verbalize. There's lots of ways to process our experiences and our trauma, and you know, counseling and therapy is huge, but that's not the only way. But a lot of times that should be a component, and or it can be a trusted friend that will sit there and listen to you as you share your things, because when we're talking about something that we experience, we're bringing light to it. And when we bring something out of the darkness, out of those hidden recesses where we've stuffed it, um, it loses its hold. And so it no longer has the power that it once did over us when we bring light to it. And that happens in relationship, of being able to say, this happened to me. And that person may not fix it for you. They're not going to fix it for you. They might help you reflect, or it might just be a listening ear. But you've got to bring it out. You've got to bring light to it so it loses its power and so that you can find healing. But hiding things and internalizing, it never works. We may think it's not affecting us, but it is. It affects everything we do. It affects our relationships and how we interpret the world around us.
Yeah, yeah. I uh, I spent a lot of years in active addiction, um, and having made a pledge to myself, there are a lot of areas in my life, things I've experienced, and things that I'm doing in the present that nobody will ever know. I'll go to my grave without anybody ever knowing that. And my experience was I never, this is going to tie into my second thought here. Um, for years, I read every book I could get my hands on. Um, Still today, I've got a reputation for reading studies. I read every study I can find on anything. Um, for instance, I found a study that said that we need 6 to 8 hugs a day. Um,
I gave you one
to
last night.
you did, your husband did, and 3 or 4 other guys did.
There you go.
It's become kind of a thing in our Monday night group, guys hugging each other. I know that sounds weird, but guys hugging each other as they come in and go out. And that same study said that at least one of those hugs should last at least 40 seconds.
Mm.
See? Now, that study made me really uncomfortable, but I have a reputation everywhere I go now. I checked into an online meeting a couple nights ago, and somebody, as soon as Zoom came on, oh, it's the hug guy. And, but I have that group, that Monday night group that I'm in, which is a safe place. We're not there to fix each other,
Mhm.
but it's a place where we can be open and honest about anything. And I hate to sound a little critical here, but nobody's going to tell me you just need to read your Bible more and pray more. And nobody's going to give me 3 steps that are guaranteed to fix me in 30 days.
Mhm.
Most of the time, it's just having somebody listen. And it's me being able to share and see guys around the table that as I'm talking, they haven't experienced the exact same things I have, but I see their heads start to nod. And something inside me lets me know that they understand what I'm talking about. So, why? I don't know if this is a problem for women, and it's not a problem for all men, but it is a problem for a lot of men that I know. You can speak to women in this question. Why can't we, and you have addressed it a little, why can't we just think our way out of our trauma responses? Why can't we just read a book, listen to a podcast, and live a healthy life?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. God made us for a relationship. He made us for a relationship with Him, first and foremost, and He made us for a relationship with each other. And you just can't walk this journey of life alone and feel fulfilled and happy and content and healthy because He made us to love and be loved. And when we're walking a journey alone, we're not doing either of those things. We don't have anyone to pour love into us. We don't have anyone that we can pour love into. And so, um, you know, it, I think I think quiet time is first and foremost most important thing we do is our own relationship with God and that's speaking and listening, reading his word, praying, listening for him to talk to us. But it's also those relationships he's given to us. And, I think that some things are hard to share because there's shame, because they're so hurtful. Sometimes we can't even verbalize it. And so, there's different ways to process through and not all like verbalizing things help, yes, but not all ways are verbal processing. And so journaling is huge because sometimes we think and we process differently when we're writing something out versus when I'm speaking to you. And there are a lot of other regulation techniques and things that help us process in our bodies. So it's not a one thing. This one thing is going to make you well. There are lots of areas and lots of directions from which you need to address trauma. And it takes doing multiple things to help you find healing in your journey.
Yeah, yeah. Um, we're coming up on the end of our time. And I got to be honest, I still have like 40 questions on my sheet here. Plus, I've
I
written
told
some
you
new
when you
ones.
sent me your questions, I said, Ron, this might be a two-parter.
I know I send guest questions and sometimes I overwhelm them. But man, I always just have so much. And when I have smart people, I want to hear their answers, see? And, but um, we're coming up on the end of our time. What are, when we feel ourselves getting triggered, and if you're willing at some point in the future, I'd like to have you come back because I do still have a lot of questions.
Yes, of course I
But
would.
what are I had some questions about coping mechanisms, but I wanted to take a look at unhealthy and healthy, and I don't have time for both of those
Mhm.
today. So, what I'm
Mhm.
wondering is when we feel ourselves getting triggered, when something's happened, and I can feel things rising up inside of me, and I know what's happening inside of me isn't my perfect example is I can get furious behind the wheel of my truck. Something happens, and I'm a totally different person when I'm in that truck by myself. And I know nobody can see me and nobody can hear me. And I will know that what just happened, that person cutting in front of me or whatever, that's not everything that's going on.
Right.
Something else is at work here. On a healthy side of that, and it doesn't have to be specifically for when I'm driving a truck and have a meltdown. It can be just in general. What can you share one or two healthy coping tools that we can use when we feel ourselves getting activated, getting triggered? What's something that we can use to de-escalate the situation?
Sure, I can think of two that I'll share that are you can do it anywhere, at any point in time, and people won't even know what you're doing. So like I mentioned before, when we're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, our lid is flipped, that car has pulled out in front of us, and now they're in the fast lane going 50 miles an hour, and you cannot get around them. Um, your sympathetic nervous system has triggered and it's in full gear. But what we want to do is we want to activate the parasympathetic nervous system because that puts the brakes on everything. So it brings our eyes back down, the pupils back down to their normal size, our heartbeat slows down, our lungs, we're breathing normally again. And so we have a trigger point right under our nose right there. And so we call this with our kids, we call it magic mustache. And you're kind of grinning because I know my husband, this was his favorite thing to do when he first learned it. So you just take your finger like a mustache on your upper lip and just hold it there and hold that pressure there. And you can hold that for a couple minutes. And that is stimulating that parasympathetic nervous system. And so everything starts to slow down in your body and come back to normal. And you should feel your breathing start to regulate and things like that. But the thing, my number one go-to is always deep breathing. And it's the same thing when we practice deep breathing, it's activating that parasympathetic nervous system and kind of pulling everything back in. But you can practice it. And if you take time and you're like, okay, what is my body doing right now? And you just stop for a minute and you think, oh, well, I'm feeling I'm feeling some tension in my shoulders. My heart's beating a little bit because I'm speaking right now and I've been moving. But if I start breathing and I like resonance breathing, there's lots of different breathing techniques. But resonance is you breathe in for the count of six and out for the count of six. And you can do that for 2 or 3 minutes. And if you do that and just breathe in and out for the count of six, deep breath in, then blow it all out, counting to six. After a couple minutes, you're going to notice, okay, my heart's slowed down. My muscles are feeling more relaxed. I'm feeling calm. Like you can't tell someone to be calm, but you can breathe into calm. And so that is best thing that is so easy that you can do behind the steering wheel. You can do sitting at your office desk. You can do laying in bed. You can do when you're out walking. You can do it anywhere. And breathing is so important. It really does help bring everything back down and help your body to regulate. And there's lots of other techniques that if you have me back, we can talk about more. But that one is my favorite because it works. It just works.
Yeah. I gotta be honest with you. I grew up in an environment in the church world, kind of a fundamentalist environment, where things like breathing um, was mocked.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the guys, some of the guys that are here with us tonight have heard me talk about that. I used to have a term when people would bring up breathing, everything in me, man, activated me. That activated me is probably a trauma response because of what I experienced when I was young. But I used to have a technical term for things like that, breathing exercises. I called it hippy dippy new age crap.
Yep.
But over the years, I've seen and experienced the benefit. And I tell that to guys now, and I watch their faces, and I'll always follow up. I know what you're thinking. Hippy dippy new age crap. That's what's going through your head. But this
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, I've had comments before like, um, oh yeah, that's new age. No, it's the way God made our bodies, and He made our bodies to heal. He made our bodies to be able to regulate and to go in and out of these things. And isn't that amazing that we can do that? And you don't need anything. You can just do that on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, we're at the end of our time tonight. I don't want to keep everybody late. I want to thank everybody that's been here with us tonight. We've had a number of comments. We've actually had requests in the comments for you to come back. See, I told you people
Was that
like
my
it better.
husband?
No, it was not your husband. It was not your husband. Somebody said it really would be nice if this turned into a two-parter. So,
Glad to do
um,
it. We'll figure out a
yeah.
time.
So, yeah, I want to thank you for being here. I always learn so much when I have a guest on here with me. And I really appreciate you spending time with us, talking with us, being patient with me. And I'm glad that you've been here. I will be back next Tuesday night, same time, 8 Eastern Standard. I'll be back next week. I'm going to be by myself. I do want to let everybody know that I have some more guests coming up, and Betsy and I'll talk, and we'll work on a time when maybe we can reconnect and she can be back. If this doesn't wear her out, she's up past her bedtime. So
Him. But for
if
you, I
this
would do it,
doesn't,
Ron.
yeah, if this doesn't hit her too hard, come tomorrow morning. But coming up next month, I have an officer from the Louisville Police Department that is part of a task force that works with homelessness. And he's going to be here with us next month as a guest to talk about the relationship between crime and addiction, and specifically between homelessness and addiction. That'll be coming up in April. In May, I have a pastor and a leader of a Celebrate Recovery group in this pastor's church, and they'll be here I believe, in May to talk with us about the role and the responsibility of the church in regards to addiction. And we'll be talking about that. And I've got some other people that we're looking at moving into the future. I'm here every week, every Tuesday night, once a month. I shoot for a guest, and they're always smarter than me, just like tonight. And I'm always really excited to have them here. So thanks for being with me tonight. Thanks everybody for being here. And if you get a chance, join me again next Tuesday night, and let's talk recovery.